Welcome back to the Bandwich Tapes. I'm Brad Williams. Today's guest is an absolute legend, David Garibaldi, the rhythmic architect behind Tower of Power's unmistakable sound. His grooves have shaped the way drummers think about funk, linear playing, and ensemble precision. In this episode, David takes us inside his creative process, breaks down the moments that defined his career, and reflects on the mindset that's kept him inspired for decades. If you've ever tried to decode one of his patterns or tried to survive one, this conversation is a masterclass in groove, artistry, and intention. So let's get into it. Here's David Garibaldi. David Garibaldi, welcome to the podcast. How are you today, sir?
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Figured since neither of our teams are in the postseason, what do we have to do with our time but just hang out and talk a little bit?
That's correct.
Sad state of affairs when my Braves aren't in the postseason.
Well, there's a lot of good teams to contend with. The Dodgers look, I hate to say it, I hate to even let the word come out of my mouth, but they look really seriously good.
I know, and I hate to hear you say it, but I agree with you. It's,
When there was a few years ago, because the Dodgers are like a big, rivalry, Giants rivalry, right?
Yeah.
And so they used to have the Duck the Fodgers T-shirts that would come out.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you'd see those, they would come out, that was, whenever they were coming to town, here come the T-shirt.
I need to look online, and I need to make a note to go and buy one of those just to wear around.
I haven't seen one in a while, but they were around for a while. Duck the Fodgers.
Well, that is fantastic. I'm going to have to find one of those. That's great. So, we were just catching up a little bit before we started, and I'm happy to hear that you're doing some playing and rehearsing with Roger. Tell me about that project you
Roger
guys are doing.
Smith, Roger's, he's got a whole thing, kind of smooth jazz thing he does, he's been doing that for years alongside Tower. And, so now he's done with Tower, just like I am. He's off the bus. And so, he started his own cool little band, Actually, he's had it for a while, but he's kind of restructured it and, going to do more stuff with it now.
Yeah, that's great. And so it's a kind of a jazz format thing? Is it like a quartet?
The players are really great. Curtis Olson playing bass, Bay Area guy, great player. Mark Russo playing saxophone, alto.
Yeah.
It was, with Tower and with the Yellow Jackets and tons of other folks, great player. Mike Gregory from Sacramento. He's a fabulous guitar player. So, a cool bunch of guys and, we're just having fun together. It's good.
Do you find that, you've been playing a long time, and I would say your playing is like the DNA of like modern funk and pop drumming. I believe that. Do you find that after all this time, you're still learning things about the way you play and different approaches to the instrument? How do you still feel about that when you sit behind the kit?
Well, things evolve.
Yeah.
And, now I don't have that gig that, that I had for all those years, playing like at that kind of that sort of thing every day.
Yeah.
And so it's very different now. But, I still practice all the time, practice every day. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff to learn and get into. My performance thing is much different than it was, which is okay. But you can learn tons of stuff on, but on the instrument. It's pretty cool stuff. I love it. It's an open-ended deal. So much to it, so much to learn, so much to get into. If you want to play well, you have to invest the time. You have to spend a lot of time by yourself, in a room alone, working on details and going in the suck zone, so that you can, you can develop, different aspects of your playing and, that kind of thing. I think that if you want to play and you want to play well, and you're willing to invest the time, you can play well. And I don't think it's the domain of a select few, by any means. I think that genius is self-attained. You find something that lights you up about anything and you follow it and you get into it, things happen, I mean, you look at, guys like, like Vinny, and even the guy in your town there, Dave Weckl,
Yeah.
Those guys, I mean, they didn't just arrive on Earth doing that. I mean, that's a lot of hours. That's a lot of time spent, a lot of imagining, just a lot of work and building, it takes a long time.
Yeah, and I would say, as you mentioned, Vinny and Dave, both of those names come to mind quickly in that I feel like both of them are always, every time you hear them, you can tell that they're still trying to improve their craft every time. They're learning new things all the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Dennis is one of my good pals, Dennis Chambers. We've known each other for many, many years. And he is another guy, he comes at it from a different way. He doesn't read music and that kind of thing, but he's got the huge ears. He can play all kinds of different styles. He's very creative and has beautiful sound when he plays, and he's growing all the time.
Yeah. It's beautiful to see. I encourage young listeners who are listening to this that you don't get it and then that's it. It's a lifelong pursuit of trying to get better.
If you think you got it, you don't have it.
You don't have it.
Yeah. It's kind of like that, So you just it's a work in progress. You have to keep building and looking and searching, and your instrument will talk to you. It'll tell you what it needs for you to do what you got to do.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about the current landscape of drummers and I just think of how differently it was when you and I were learning how to play music and not having this world of content at our fingertips at all times with YouTube and every song available at a moment's notice. Sometimes I feel like that's an amazing thing to have, but other times I'm thankful that we had to go and seek things out, and I'd be curious to know your thoughts on the pros and cons of both of those different landscapes.
Well, every era is different. There's always something, something new, something that someone's doing that's going to be different and eye-opening and creative and, all of that. It's still, to really create, you have to use your imagination, So yes, you can see YouTube. Yes, there's all these things that you said, but still, if you want to build you have to use your imagination. You have to, what is it about music? What is it about this that you love doing? And that's the thing that you're going to follow and build. And it takes, imagination to do that, So when I was coming up around here in the Bay Area, it was, of course, in the air, I'm, a little bit older, and so there wasn't any internet or that sort of thing. You learned by listening to recordings, listening.
That's it.
And then if you had the chance to go see somebody that you liked play live, that was cool. But then there's also, your pals, your neighborhood guys, your people that you hang with, and you exchange of ideas and that stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen that podcast that we did, Stick People, with Mike Clark and all those guys,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's all guys here that were here in the Bay Area, all of them, and came up in that same thing. And each one of those guys, has their own sort of thing, their own sort of sound, their own sort of input, their own sort of vibe, their own kind of default setting. And so one cool thing about the way that I learned is that it was fusion before it was fusion. And so everyone was interested in all sorts of different things. Everybody had a default setting, something that they liked about drums that, they were building on. But then there's all the other things that they like too, that people like as well, that influenced, that flavored what we were doing. So I look at flavor. I think of flavor, so I like the funky thing. I like all that, the kind of a groove based sort of playing. I love that. But I also like a lot of other kinds of stuff. I love straight ahead jazz. I love big band, like I love all the, timbal, the Latin stuff, Brazilian stuff, classical music, everything, And so whatever's good, and that influences me, and so I take those things and I flavor what I do with that stuff. I'm not an expert on any of those things by any means, but I know enough about them to flavor what I do. And that's what the Stick People thing, that's what all those guys was happening with all those guys as well.
Well, and I would say that listening to you play and, talking about big band, I hear all of those different stylistic influences, bleeding into the, when I hear you play, I mean, it's like, you may be playing a funky Tower of Power tune, but you can hear a big band chart in that, playing hits. And, I mean, I hear all of that in there, those flavors that you talk about,
Yeah,
I hear it.
Tower was like a big band, but we just played 16th notes. So you think about it in the same way, you set up figures, you have section figures, ensemble figures. What happens? You comp behind soloists and, all of these things, dynamics, a lot of different influences in the music. You can hear it in all the recordings,
Yeah.
All the music that we liked, you can hear it in all those recordings, in different forms, different flavors,
Yeah, absolutely. So my story is that I started out as a drummer, played percussion, but somewhere along the way decided that I was going to be a singing bass player. I found that I was more employable that way, I think. I felt a little more in demand as a singing bass player, but I think I love getting to play bass with great drummers more than playing drums. And I could spend the rest of my life talking about the drummer bass player relationship, and I would say that, the rhythm section relationship that you were lucky enough to play in for so many years, I mean, it kind of is the gold stamp on as far as what all rhythm sections strive to be. When you and Rocco were writing these parts over the years, was it a democratic thing? What was the process that you guys, and I guess too, did that locked in thing, was that immediate? How did that all happen with you two?
Well, Rocco and I had immediate chemistry.
Yeah.
We were just waiting for each other, really. And so being able to play together, it just, the big thing about us was listening. If you think of music as a conversation, the key component in any conversation is listening. Because if you listen, then you know how to respond. So if you're talking all the time, then it makes it very difficult for there to be any sort of conversation, a dialogue. And, so with Rocco and I, it was just a listening thing, playing ideas and that sort of thing. He was not a schooled musician. His thing was very intuitive. He could really play with a drummer like glue. And so he had a sound, he had a way that he did things that was all really his own. Remember when he passed away, Berkeley, Victor Wooten and Steve Bailey, they did a tribute to him, and all the bass players were there, all of them, man. Carter, Anthony Jackson, John Patitucci, I mean, all the great ones were there to pay tribute to him, Lee Sklar, And so they're talking about how they were trying to understand Rocco, trying to to get him, and having difficulties, in translating what he was doing to what they were doing, right? And so Rocco, you can't teach wrong. He just had this way that he did things, his own techniques. I remember he and I did clinics in Italy one time. And Italian people, they sort of like, flawed personalities. They sort of dig that sort of thing, And so we're doing the clinics and Rocco won't talk. He won't say anything. And I said, dude, you have to talk, man. You have to tell people what you're doing. You got to explain this stuff to them. And he was like, he really moaning about it and stuff, but he did it. He started talking, and the Italians, they just freaked out when they saw and understood how he did what he did and how unorthodox it was and how it was his own technique. And it was very, very interesting because he would move up and down the neck with just 2 fingers and mute with the 3rd and 4th fingers. So it was this thing that was moving all the time. And then he would play a lot of muted notes that sounded like the bass drum. So it was like tone and muted together. He'd create this little stew that was going on, with what he was hearing and relating to that the drums were doing.
Yeah.
And I remember, I've told the story a number of times, but when we first started playing together, I would make cassette tapes of the rehearsals so that I could learn the music. And I was listening and I'm hearing Rocco, when I would play on the hi-hat, he would play really short staccato notes. And when then I would play on the cymbal where things were more legato, he'd play, longer, more legato tones. And it was this back and forth, short, long, just like what I was doing, what he was hearing, relating to the length of the sounds and all that. And I said, bro, I told him what I was hearing. I said, do you know that you're doing this? Explained it to him. And he said, well, no, man, I just think that that's what I should do. Hello? I mean, guys go to college and never figure that out. They go to music school and they never understand it in that way.
That is, yeah. There's like years of knowledge in that one little statement right there, right?
No, it's just, that's what I think I should do. Well, hello, exactly.
Yeah.
He's relating, he's hearing something and he's relating it to, replicating a sound on his instrument, just like, we do with the drums. I mean, I think that comes first, is having the sounds in your head, and then you replicate those sounds. That's what I always did. That's why I learned how to play, man. I learned like that,
Right. Well, and also just the act of paying enough attention to what the guy next to you is doing to listen and not just, focus on what he's doing. I mean, to get that granular with listening to the tone, the sound, the decay between your hi-hat and your cymbal, that's pretty magical. It's amazing.
Well, the Tower gig was like, the drums were kind of like a central sort of a thing there, and the trumpet players used to tell me, well, you're the lead trumpet player. And so that's why, and they would just lock on to what they were hearing.
Yeah.
One trumpet player we had for a long time, Sal Cracchiolo, was in Poncho Sancho's band for 20 years. And so he knew how to play with drums, and he had a very percussive kind of edge on his sound, typical lead trumpet player sound with a nice edge and attack and everything. And then he would just like line himself up with what he was hearing. Adolfo the same way. Those guys, they were wonderful to play with.
Yeah. When new players would join the band, did they typically adjust their approach to meld into what the band was already doing, or did the band ever adjust to
Never.
Welcome to the gig, man. This
Yes,
is how we do it.
This is what we do, So the first year in the band, we always called it Tower 101. That's where you learn kind of how we operate. You learn how we play the music. You learn how we interact with each other off the bandstand, so you can hang, because we spend so much time together, If you're not a nice person, you're not going to be able to keep the gig, because everybody was really cool. Everybody was fun. Everybody treated each other with respect. And it was a great bunch of people, from everybody, the crew, management, guys in the band, the crew. We'd make sure that the guys in the crew had that sort of mindset as well, because we were together all the time.
Yeah.
And so our 101, how we interpret 16th notes and 8th notes and kind of the way we interpret time and all of that, a little different than what other bands were doing.
Yeah. A lot of rehearsals. Did you guys rehearse a lot?
Yeah. It was like a labor-intensive sort of a deal. When I first joined the band, really early on, we used to rehearse every day, every single day. And when we weren't gigging, we were rehearsing. We were playing the music and building the music. And then we'd start touring. We would come home, maybe depending on how everybody felt, we'd be in the rehearsal studio the next day. So we had a rehearsal studio of our own in Berkeley, California, here in the Bay Area, when I first joined the band. And then we got rid of that and we moved over to Studio Instrument and Reynolds in San Francisco. And we were there all the time. And that's all the bands were in there. I mean, everybody was there. And so everybody would keep their gear, and it was kind of a place that everybody would hang out. So even if you weren't rehearsing, you were over there hanging out with everybody, It was a really cool sort of thing. So the rehearsal thing, even later years, everybody lived apart from each other. We still would rehearse on show days. Every show day was a sound check rehearsal.
Really?
Yeah. And if we were working on music, that's where we would do it. So sound checks were always we'd start with a jam session, always. A rhythm section, jam session. And we'd do that for a while. And then the rest of the guys would come out and we would do the sound check. If there was music we had to put together, we would do it there.
Yeah.
If we were changing arrangement, maybe working on medleys or changing figures, we would rehearse those things until we had it. And then Emilio, Mimi, he would say to everybody, well, was everybody ready? Can we do this? And if everybody's ready to go, then we would do it. If people weren't ready, they would say so. We need another day, another couple days or whatever, just to get it right. And as soon as it was, we'd add it to the show.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've watched. There's some videos out there of you guys, someone like walking around with a phone or a handheld or something during those jam sessions, I guess, before sound check. And it's fun to just, because everything's so tight all the time with your arrangements. And it's kind of fun to just kind of hear everyone just kind of be a little more, I mean, it's still tight, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no,
you know what I mean?
Sure, no.
But it's kind of, just kind of everybody be a little more laid back with what's going on. It's really fun to hear it.
Well, and also there was a lot of, different interests, musical interests that everyone had. And so, as I said before, and so those things were always showing up. We'd mess around with things in rehearsal. And, I had this stuff that I like to do. It's in my books and I kind of mess around with it where you play odd time in 4/4. So you create these really long phrases, but it could be 7, 9, 11, 13, all these crazy things, right? And so sometimes when we would run through the songs, at sound check, I'd play one of those weird, kind of things, what was cool about it is that nobody ever said, don't do it. As a matter of fact, the rhythm section guy said, oh, do that, man, do that in the song. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But what was cool about it is it helped discipline everyone to be aware of the time.
Yeah. I bet everyone, tuned in a little. Even more than they already were, yeah.
Yeah, and so, the cool thing about that band is, it's a team, it's teamwork that you're hearing, That's really, really important part of what that band is. That's why the band sounds like it does, Everybody plays together and listens and, functions together.
Yeah, and it's just everything it's the piece of this just incredible interlocking puzzle that comes together that is that sound. That's
we did a bunch of gigs for a while. We were managed by Dave Sanborn's manager, Pat Raines. So a couple of years we did that, and we went everywhere with Dave. Had really, really great gigs all over the U.S. and Europe and everything. It was fantastic. And Dave used to listen to us. He'd go, "You guys sound like popcorn." Stuff going off, flying all over the place.
It's really funny. So in reading your info, Did you do a military band before you were
I did.
Tower
I was
Power?
in the Air Force, on the Air Force Band. Air Force Field Band, the 724th Air Force Band in McCord Air Force Base in Tacoma, Washington.
Okay. Was it like a concert band type thing?
Yeah.
Was it marching? Okay.
That was everything. That was my job in the military. So it was in the Air Force music program. And so, that was during the Vietnam time,
Mm-hmm.
so things could have been way worse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I enlisted into the Air Force because the law was I had been drafted in the Army. But the law is that if you could enlist into any other service prior to your draft date. So I enlisted into the Air Force and went in as a clerk just so I could get it out of the way. And in basic training, one of the instructors came in and said, "Who plays an instrument around here?" So I raised my hand. I was the only one that raised my hand. So they took me over to the band barracks and auditioned for the band. When my orders came, it said Air Force Band.
No kidding. Could you, at this point, were you a good reader and good player and everything at that point? How did you feel about your playing at that point in your life?
Well, I was, 19.
Yeah.
How does anybody feel when they're 19? And so, I had a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But it was a great, great situation. We had our section leader. His name was Jim Nolan, and he had a lot of experience. He was much older than us, all the new guys, and was an excellent concert percussionist, played timpani and mallet percussion, all this stuff, an excellent drum set player. And eventually he went to the Air Force Band in Washington, D.C., and became the section leader in the concert band and played timpani with the Air Force concert band for years. And I learned a lot from him. He was just cool. He taught us all, and it was a great, great thing. There's marching bands, there was, concert band. We had a great jazz band, small groups, that sort of thing. So it was a good experience,
When you get the notion, Tower's got the potion. You might begin to set yourself in motion. I'm talking about soul vaccination. Soul vaccination. Soul vaccination. Everybody get in line. Soul vaccination. Soul vaccination from old bad health. Part of our soul protection plan. Vaccinate. Get ready for the injection. Cut down on the infection cause soon we got soul protection. I'm talking about soul vaccination. Soul vaccination. Soul vaccination. Everybody stand in line. Soul vaccination.
I talk with a lot of percussionists on here, and I think for me specifically, timpani is such an important instrument that translates so well to other percussion instruments, including drum set, just about tone production and just the touch on the instrument, because I just feel like it's so important for achieving the sound that you want. I think timpani
Well, it certainly helps. It certainly helps
certainly.
to have that, So my thing with, concert percussion was in those years when I was in the military, studying mallets and learning how to do that sort of thing. And a little bit after I got out of the military in college band. But then after that, I devoted all my time like to drum set. But what remained was kind of a more musical ear, to the drum set, and to the way that I related to music.
Absolutely. And I think taking that active listening role in an ensemble like that is also really important to have a better understanding sitting in a band. I think it's really
Yeah. I loved doing it. I mean, I probably would have stayed in the military, but, the music thing was still very traditional, concert bands and, and that sort of stuff. And then also I loved Seattle, and I was really considering staying there, but there really wasn't a lot of music. Seattle at the time was a very regional kind of a music thing. It was very small and it was good. But, coming back here to the Bay Area, I mean, everything was going on here.
Yeah.
And so I came back here and, dove right in, to that,
So how long was your enlistment?
3.5 years. Yeah, 3.5 years. I got out in December of 69.
Okay.
December 1960.
And when did Tower of Power start? How long had you been back when that all started?
Tower started in 1968.
Okay.
So I was playing, starting to do gigs around the Bay Area, and I was subbing for a drummer in an area called Jack London Square in Oakland, downtown Oakland, a place where there was a lot of clubs and that sort of thing. And there was a band there that I was subbing for the drummer. It was called the Reality Sandwich.
Such a great night.
Well, and it also could be today too.
That's true.
So it was a cool band, fun. We had some horns in it, and that sort of thing. And that's where I met Mike Clark, because Mike he would sub in that band as well. So that's
cool.
That's where we connected. This was like early 1970, and so Tower guys, two of the horn players used to come and sit in. And one night they came in and they asked me if I was interested in coming to check them out, because they're thinking about making a change in their drummer. And so they had won this battle of the bands at the Fillmore in San Francisco. Fillmore West used to have this thing on Tuesday nights called Sounds of the City. And it was like a battle of the bands. And they won this record deal with one of Bill Graham's labels. He had two labels, one on Atlantic and one distributed by CBS. So we were on the Atlantic distributed label, San Francisco Records it was called. So it was like that. And I went and checked them out. They were playing at a club in San Francisco called the Keystone Corner. And it was like kind of a rock and roll club. It became jazz clubs, but it was kind of a rock and roll club at the time. But they had all kinds of different music in there, all sorts of stuff. Because I saw the original Chick Corea trio in there and, all kinds of different things. Wow. And so I heard them, and they were doing original music and then really obscure cover tunes that you would only know if you knew music, and they were arranging them in their own way. They were already doing it, and they were like young dudes, 18 years old, guys like that. And so I heard it, and I fell in love with it,
Sure.
And then Emilio came over to the club, checked me out a little bit further, and then invited me to come and play with everybody. And it was a kind of instant sort of connection,
Yeah. Were you thinking about how I want to ask this question? Were you already you as a drummer when you joined that band, or did you feel like you evolved a lot starting to play with those guys?
All of the above. I mean,
yeah.
The thing that I liked about music was that you could be yourself, and there wasn't any pressure to sound like anybody else. If anything, there was pressure to be you. And what I liked about when I would listen to my favorite drummers on recordings was that they had a personality and that they would sound like them, like themselves. And they weren't copycats. They weren't clones. Everybody sounded different, Tony, Elvin, Jake Hanna, Sonny Payne, Gregorico, the Zig with the meters, Bernard Purdy, the drummers of James Brown, all those drummers. I mean, shit, they all sound different.
Yeah. Like themselves.
Exactly. And, and what I learned through all of this is that that's what art is. They say you've heard art called self-expression, but for some reason we don't really believe it, because we assign greatness to other people, and say that we hear others that they're some sort of gifted in some way that we're not. And how do we get there? And how's there room for me when there's all that going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate. I don't think that it really works. I don't think it works that way. All the principles of success that you use in any other profession work in music. Everything, attention to detail, time and service, all of these things, study.
No, I agree. I do think that, if we're talking about like commercial music, I do think that there's that tendency that the thing that sells, the powers that be will find 5 or 6 other people that sound very similar to it and push that out. But it's, that
I don't care. I mean, I don't think if you really want to play well, just play. Just play the way you want to play. Play, what you hear, what you feel, When you go to, I go to Europe a lot, over the years. My wife's from Europe, she's European, grew up there. And so I like to go to art museums, the Louvre in Paris, the Vatican Museum, the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, those kind of things. The Van Gogh Museum, in Amsterdam, those kind of things. You go there, these places, and you sit there. They have, paintings, all these big rooms. And then in the middle is a big bench or benches where you can sit and you can just look and admire what's there and let the art speak to you. It's amazing, man. It's so, and you look at some of this stuff and you can sit there and you just start looking and all of a sudden you see detail, amazing detail. I mean, going to look at Da Vinci's stuff, that's amazing. All his anatomical drawings and all that stuff, come on. I mean, that's absolutely incredible.
And you could look at it 1,000 times and then look at it another time and still find something new with it, which is
isn't that
beautiful?
Isn't that what we see when we listen to our favorite players? Isn't that what we see? Always something else that you didn't maybe see another time,
Yeah, that's it. Even if it's a song that we've listened to 1,000 times, it's like, oh yeah, listen to that. I didn't hear that all those times. Yeah. And I find that, at least for me, I find that the older I get, I feel like my perspective on some of that changes. And that's when I hear even more things that I had not heard before, which is also wonderful. I think, you've influenced certainly so many countless drummers through generations. And this, these new drummers that are out there, what are you noticing that may give you hope about the next generation of drummers that are out on the scene these days?
I don't even think about it like that. I mean, because it's art, people are expressing themselves. I mean, when I came up, there was no one really before us, who was doing what we ended up doing, because we were on the cusp of kind of the way that, music education is you studied the jazz and classical tradition. And that's kind of how you learned and how you played. But, our generation, our era was like, all these rock and roll players. Everybody wanted to play rock and roll and, eighth notes and 16th notes and groove and James Brown and Carmine, Appice and all these guys, Vanilla Fudge, all that stuff, and, so that was just the way that it was,
Yeah.
And so every generation influences another, and so, I hear people play. I mean, I think it's cool what people are doing,
Yeah.
I mean, they're expressing themselves. I don't have any criticisms about any of those things because it's art.
Yeah.
So I don't really think of those things with a critical eye, And now, that being said, I do have things I like and things that I don't like.
Yeah.
But who cares?
Man, I've had a good time hanging out with you today, David. This has been an honor.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You're me. So,
that's very nice. I appreciate that. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. So hopefully this time next year, the Braves and the Giants will be battling for their place in the postseason, and we can.
We'll see. They got a lot of teams to contend with.
Yeah, they do. So I'm happy. I'm so happy you're still sharing your gifts with the world, and I want to hear you play some more, man. I love to hear you play.
It's just life, man. I mean, I'm doing some playing, not like I was before, as much as I was before.
Yeah.
But, I'm teaching. I love that. I love work.
What, if you don't mind, what are you doing with teaching now? Are you teaching like Skype stuff or?
Yeah, I do online stuff.
Online stuff?
Do teach in person over at a local drum shop, here in the area every other Saturday. I've been going in there for years since they opened. I would go in there, when Tower was home, when we were off the road, I'd go in there and spend a Saturday, and now that I'm home, I'm in there every other Saturday. And then, so I do the, Zoom lessons, clinics, that sort of thing. I got a book project I'm working on. So, there's plenty of stuff to do.
Yeah.
There's some other guys that I've worked with all this last year in Hawaii, Hawaiian guys, a Hawaiian artist named Brother Nolan. So that's been fun.
That's great. And we don't have to put it on here, but what is the book project you're working on?
Well, I'm not going to tell you the title just yet, but it's going to be another project with Hudson, Rob Wallace at Hudson Music. And it's going to be we're calling it a living book, in that it will release an initial portion of it to get things started. And then I'm going to add content, over time.
Well, that's cool.
Continue adding content to it. So it becomes like a database.
Great idea. Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have said anything.
I'll take it out. I'll edit this out. No, it's really cool. And, it's like, why haven't we seen more of those? So yeah,
Don't know.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. Yeah. Well, good. Well, all the best, sir. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
I appreciate
Likewise.
you. Yeah, you appreciate you doing this, and we'll, just thanks for the music, Dave.
Oh, you're welcome, man. All the best to you.
Thanks a lot. That's a wrap on my interview with the legendary David Garibaldi. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell a friend about the show. Thanks for listening to the Bandwich Tapes. More great conversations are on the way.